Before the start of this devlog, I would like to mention that nothing shown in this video is final. Everything shown is susceptible to change if need be. This includes everything from sprites and abilities to developers working on the game. Rest assured, if any major changes do take place, we'll be sure to inform everyone shortly after. I'd also like to add that all sprites shown are currently placeholders, as sprite work has only started development recently. I would like to give a thanks to everyone that supported us, and everyone that will continue to support us. With this being our first devlog and Luminossity Studios only recently forming, I felt this might be a good time to give a formal introduction to the group. Though, if you want to just hear about the game, you can go to the timestamp currently on screen. With that being said, I would like to start with an introduction of some of our developers. At the current moment, Luminosity Studios has 5 developers. Of those developers, we will introduce the 3 lead developers on this project. The first of our 3 lead developers is Isaac Liao. Isaac is the one who had the idea to make a game and brought the rest of our members onto the project. Out of our members, he is the best coder. Due to this, he handles most code having to do with the game. To be more specific, he handles code for enemies, AI, UI, and bosses at the current moment. Along with this, he is our head UI designer, in charge of creating the layouts for all the menus. The second developer is Diego Reyes. Diego is our second coder and handles most of the code pertaining to the playable character. This would include movement, attack, and abilities, along with any UI elements linked to the character, like health. On top of this, he is also our head map designer, creating the layouts for most locations in-game, and our head story writer, coming up with characters, names, locations, etc. The final developer is Zachary Morales. Zachary is our head artist. He takes the ideas and concepts that our writer comes up with and turns them into reality. He's the artist behind all of the concept art that we have posted to social media, along with the company logo, and the artwork used as the banner for most of our social media accounts. With developer introductions out of the way, I'd like to give an introduction to our group as a whole. Our group, Luminosity Studios, has many features that we want to use to help differentiate ourselves from competitors, but the main one we emphasize is our passion. We want to create games that are a product of the developers' passions to make great games that others can enjoy. We want to use this passion to give the games we produce the utmost care and respect that they deserve, to deliver to players a game made with the same excitement we want them to feel while playing it. With introductions finished, we can finally talk about video games. Though, as a formality, because not everyone understands video game terminology and titles, I'll first give a description of the genre our game will fall into. Our game is a Metroidvania, a subgenre of video games in which its title derives from the 2 most influential ones, Metroid and Castlevania. Metroidvanias are a type of action platformer, often characterized by a large expansive map of which you have access to only a portion of due to obstacles blocking your path. By unlocking abilities and weapons, you'll be able to use them to get past obstacles and gain access to more sections of the map. These types of game often give a heavy incentive to explore and experiment with what you have, and will often involve a lot of backtracking to progress. As we make our game, we are making slight alterations to the common Metroidvania formula, but we plan to keep it a Metroidvania at heart. Now, I would like to talk more specifically about our game. Concurrent with the post of this devlog, we made a post to our social media pages showcasing what we have completed so far. At the moment, I'd like to give a more proper description for what we showcased and provide some insight on what they'll be used for in-game. To start, I'll talk about what is probably our most complicated piece of code, the tracking AI. At the moment, we are constantly tweaking this AI to get it closer to how it will work in-game. But what has been shown is very close to how it will function. As shown in the video, the AI will track you anywhere on the map, and we are currently working on a function for it to deal damage when it reaches you. Of course, the AI being able to track you from anywhere is a little strong, so we are currently coming up with ideas on how to limit this. Our 2 main ideas are decreasing the area in which it can track you so it can only attack you near its spawn, or give it a sightline and have it only start tracking you once you enter that sightline. As I'm sure is apparent by now, this AI will be used for flying enemies in-game. At the moment, we do not have concepts completed for what these enemies might be, but be assured that once we do, we will make a post showcasing them. The next thing we showcased is what we are currently referring to as the box test. This being, of course, our showcase of how the playable character interacts with objects and how that object, being the box, responds to the physics we have set up. This test, though, is more for our sake, as it helps us to understand the physics engine we are working with better and how enemies might react to the terrain that we have set up. Other applications for ways this function could be applied in-game are in discussion, though at the moment we don't have any notable ideas to mention. The last thing we showcased was a bit of the map that we have created at the moment. Now, it may look a little barren, and this is because we haven't started production on any sprites for the foreground or background. What we have done though is create some of the parkour for the map. This parkour is consistently being tweaked and adjusted to ensure that it is a challenge, but is still easy enough to where you can fight enemies while doing it. The parkour we showcased on our social media is from the starting area of the game, where the tutorial will be held, currently called the Oasis. The parkour within the Oasis is close to how we want it in game, and will likely only receive minor changes. The section that will likely receive more drastic changes is the one immediately after the Oasis. While some of the parkour for this section has been adjusted already, most of it is outdated due to being planned and implemented before we made a change in the physics of the playable character. So the next time we show you this section of the map, it'll likely look drastically different, though we do plan to keep the baseline of this section the same. Along with that, there were some minor features already implemented that I feel need less of a description. This includes the health bar, the pause button, a jump button, and a sprint key. As I'm sure has also been noticed, we implemented the first of our sprites and animations, this being the hedgehog and its walk cycle. So far, these are all the features that have been added to the game, though there are many we are going to add. The game at the moment may seem a little lackluster, but with the harder code finished and the addition of a new member for sprite work, we hope that we can begin to work at a pace to continue to bring new updates on the game at regular intervals. So, as a little taste for what is to come, I would like to discuss the features and ideas that we plan to add in the future. I would like to add that not all the things talked about will be in the early access version for playtesting, and that again, everything we talk about is susceptible to change if the need arises, and that some features might not make it to the final build of the game. Now, I would like to introduce two of the basic enemies that you might encounter in-game. Unfortunately, we don't have concept art for these two yet, but our artists are working hard to get those out. The first of these two common enemies is the ant. The ant is the most common enemy you'll likely find throughout the game. They'll have a simple bite attack that doesn't do much damage, but you'll encounter a lot of them. Ants will appear throughout most of the map, especially in the early game, and if the ant doesn't show up, one of its variants most likely will. One of these variants being the second common enemy we'll discuss today, the cockroach. Like the ant, cockroaches will have a basic attack, either being a bite or a tackle. Cockroaches, though, will show up in some of the places ants won't, more specifically dark or damp areas throughout the map. We currently have concept art for these enemies in production and hope to have them ready to post soon. Along with these enemies, I'd like to introduce the first mini-bosses you'll encounter in the game, and the mini-bosses that'll be challengeable when the early access releases to patrons, the turtle and the hamster. I'm sure some of you have seen them already on our social media, and I'd like to go more in depth into our plans with these fights. Unfortunately, at the current moment, we still don't have an official name for these mini-bosses, so for now, we'll continue to refer to them as the turtle and the hamster. You can fight these bosses in whatever order you want, as the pathway to both these bosses are pretty straightforward and fully accessible without any abilities. Though, we do highly encourage exploration, as you might find an ability that can help in the fight, but more on that later. The first boss I'll go in depth with is the hamster. The hamster is going to be a mobile fighter focused on getting close to you quickly, dealing damage, then retreating before repeating. The hamster will be in a smaller space than other mini-bosses you'll fight, so it can quickly get in and attack, but you'll also be able to get close to deal damage in return. We are also working on implementing a second stage to this boss. This stage would likely revolve around the hamster in some sort of wheel or ball, where it will then bash into you at high speeds. The turtle, on the other hand, in contrast to the hamster, will be a slow fighter, with strikes that deal high damage. Unlike the hamster, the turtle won't have phases in its fight. Instead, it will take into account how close you are to it. If you are far from the turtle, it'll launch projectiles at you, with every fifth projectile being on fire and doing more damage than the rest. If you get close to the turtle, though, it'll choose between two attacks, a quick attack or a slow attack. The quick attack does less damage with high knockback to get you away from it, while the slow attack does less knockback with high damage. We are still working out how exactly we want the bosses to work and how it'll choose what attacks it'll use, but we hope this gives you a good idea of how they will work. Earlier I mentioned that Terrestrial will differ from the common Metroidvania style. Along with regular Metroidvania elements, we will be adding in some RPG elements as well. We are still playing around with multiple ideas for what this might entail, one of these ideas being a currency-based skill tree. This currency would be dropped by enemies, and you'd gather enough to buy upgrades to certain stats of the player. You'd be able to upgrade stats like speed, strength, and stamina, but each stat will be limited by what Hedgehog variants you choose to play after the first boss. We are still testing for how we could implement these ideas well, but we do hope to get them working soon. While we are planning to implement ideas from other genres, we do plan to keep this a Metroidvania. One of the areas we hope to make this apparent in is the combat system. At the moment, as we have only got an AI finished recently, the combat is still being tested to properly perfect. But at the moment, we hope to get the combat oriented around your understanding of the enemy you're facing. The player character won't be the most mobile fighter throughout the game. Because of this, the Hedgehog will lack a dodge, instead having a block. This block won't fully stop all damage, but will significantly reduce knockback of the player character. Due to the fact that the block doesn't negate all damage, the only way to properly avoid all damage is to avoid the attack. We hope that these basics of the combat system will incentivize players to take their time to find out how and when enemies will attack, then figure out when it is safe to attack and when to back off. Of course, abilities are also a big part of this genre, and today I'd like to talk about 3 of the available ones, in which 2 of them may have possible combat applications. The first ability you'll likely find is what has temporarily been dubbed the Wall Break. The Wall Break is an ability that, as the name implies, breaks down a wall in certain places around the map. This ability of breaking down walls will mostly be used to open up entrances to the Catacombs, an area that we will go deeper into later. During this ability, the Hedgehog will raise both of its front paws before bringing them down, reminiscent of a certain mini-boss we have already mentioned, and much like that mini-boss, this ability can also be used in combat. If used in combat, the Wall Break will deal a lot of damage to an enemy, while also temporarily stunning enemies that survive the attack. You'll also be able to charge a Wall Break. The longer it's charged for, the more damage it'll do, and the longer it'll stun an enemy, but it leaves you incredibly vulnerable. The next ability we'll talk about currently goes by the name the Spikes. Like the last ability, the Spikes can be used in combat, acting as a sort of better block that will, if timed, correctly negate all damage. If not timed correctly, negate most damage. And if used in the air, it can be used to survive falls that'll kill you otherwise. The Hedgehog in the use of this ability will ball up, much like a real Hedgehog, and use its spikes to absorb the damage taken. This ability may not be used as often as others, especially due to its simplicity, but we hope that this ability can be used to help in some situations you may otherwise not make it out of. The final ability we will touch on today is the Wall Climb, and unlike the other ones, this one doesn't have a combat use. As the name implies, this ability will let you climb up walls, though this ability can only be used for a short period of time. This ability at the moment is the simplest one, but we are still tweaking existing abilities and coming up with new ones, so this may change in the future. These abilities may be overpowered if you're just able to use them all the time. So, to help counter that, we are implementing a system that is currently called the Stamina System. The Stamina System contains a stamina bar. The stamina bar will gradually be depleted by actions that use stamina, and almost every action in the game related to movement and combat will use stamina. The only ones at the current moment that won't use stamina are basic movement and basic attack. Along the map are places that will let you regain stamina, along with certain items, but these items will be scarce, and stamina regeneration spots will be far from most areas of combat, needing you to backtrack to restore stamina. Because of the scarcity of stamina regeneration, you'll have to learn how to manage said stamina and gauge whether or not a situation requires the use of an ability. As with abilities like the Spikes, stamina can save your life later. Speaking of abilities, not every action will take the same amount of stamina. Some may take more and some may take less. Running, for example, will take the least stamina, but will be a gradual decrease that becomes apparent over a lot of usage. On the other hand, a fully charged Wall Break or a Spike usage will take a lot of stamina, as they are fairly strong abilities that could potentially save your life. I'm sure by this point everyone has seen the Hedgehog concept, and that we have lacked to mention the alternate costumes for the Hedgehog, the Archer and the Swordsman. Of course, as I'm sure as a parent, these aren't just costumes, but optional variants that change the gameplay of the game. At the end of the first boss fight, you'll be able to choose between becoming an Archer or a Swordsman. After you choose, you'll be locked into that choice for the rest of the game, with upgradable stats and abilities adjusting accordingly. Of course, the choice you make will change the combat style of the character, but at the moment we are still working on the basic combat, so we will likely not be able to give many updates on these variants for a while longer. Next time we do mention these though, we will hopefully have more to show than just concept art. As we finish talking about the characters and enemies, I'd real quick like to talk about the map. Earlier we showed you a bit of the playable map and a bit of what we plan to do with it, but the map I want to talk about at the moment is the full map. The first thing I'd like to mention is that this map is viewed from an above XZ axis view, while the game is viewed from a side XY axis view. Along with this, we have marked for both our and your convenience the starting room. I do want to say that this map isn't final, as our map designer is constantly changing spots here and there, and even at the time of writing the script, the map I have pulled up may be different from the map shown in this devlog. As you can see, the map we have in mind is fairly big, with 2 sections in the map, a top and a bottom. The top area will likely have less explorable areas with more spaces dedicated to mini-bosses and bosses, with the bottom section having more areas to explore. Of course, the main reason we are showing you this early map design is to give you a sense of how big we hope to make this game, as we have already shown you a section of the first area in the game. And of course, our early access release will take place entirely within the first area of the game. Hopefully in the future we can get some more detailed map concepts to showcase, along with a more in-depth explanation of how we are translating our 3D map design into 2D. But as we are reaching the end of the devlog, I'd like to touch on our last topic, the Catacombs. I believe that I have talked about the Catacombs here and there throughout this devlog, but I feel it needs a proper explanation. As shown on the major map, there are many sections throughout the game, and each section you'll be able to get to in 2 ways, on the surface or through the Catacombs. The Catacombs will be an all-connecting underground system that you'll be able to access via the wall break ability in certain areas found around the above-ground map. The Catacombs will house certain enemies that only show up there, and even its own mini-boss and boss fight that you can only find by exploring deep into the Catacombs further than any entrance or exits to the surface. At the current stage of development, the Catacombs are planned to be the largest section of the entire game, containing its own Easter eggs, secrets, and even abilities only found by exploring this gigantic labyrinth. Of course, exploration of the Catacombs isn't required to beat the game, as full exploration of the Catacombs will likely take a while to complete. At the moment, we still only have a bit of the Catacombs mapped out, as we have taken a focus on mapping out the first section first. But we do plan to have a section of the Catacombs explorable in the first early access version of the game to our patrons. Sadly, that is all the plans and info we have to share at the moment. Though, I sincerely hope you've liked what we've had to show, and are excited for what we plan to achieve. Before we properly end this devlog, I would like to mention that we have updated patron rewards, and that from now on, any second tier patrons or above will have their names mentioned at the end of any future devlogs. On top of that, if you want to learn more about how we plan to do the game, or stay more up to date, you can join our Discord, where at least one of our developers is active any given day, or you can follow us at one of our social medias, Twitter or Instagram. I would like to give a thanks to anyone that has watched to the end of this devlog, as well as wish them a good day.